On June 6, 2015, in the small town of Dannemora, New York, two men sentenced to life imprisonment vanished from one of the most secure prisons in the United States. The facility was surrounded by concrete walls nearly 2 meters thick, reinforced with steel, built directly into solid mountain rock, and guarded around the clock by armed watchtowers. For more than a century, Clinton Correctional Facility had been considered escape-proof. And yet, by sunrise that morning, Richard Matt and David Sweat were gone. Without explosions, without helicopters, and without anyone realizing they had left until hours later. Dannemora Prison was never meant to be subtle. It was designed to intimidate. Massive stone walls rose above a quiet town of barely 5,000 residents, an unsettling reminder that some of the most dangerous men in America were locked just a few streets away. Unlike most maximum security prisons, which sit isolated in deserts or remote plains, this one existed right in the middle of civilian life. That made security stricter, not looser. Every angle was watched. Every routine was repeated the same way every day for decades. Officials believed predictability was safety. Inside those walls, prisoners quickly learned that escape was not a dream, it was a joke. Among those prisoners was Richard Matt, a man whose crimes alone justified life behind bars. Years earlier, he had kidnapped his former boss, tortured him for money, and kept him locked in a car trunk for nearly a full day before the man died. Afterward, Matt dismembered the body with a saw and dumped it into the Niagara River. He fled to Mexico, killed again, and spent 9 years in a Mexican prison before being extradited back to the United States. By the time he arrived at Dannemora, escape was no longer a fantasy, it was an obsession. Everyone around him knew it. Family members later said that every visit turned into the same conversation. Richard didn't talk about regret. He didn't talk about appeals. He talked about leaving, over and over again. Guards noticed it too. Matt was charismatic, manipulative, and unnervingly patient. He studied people the way other inmates studied schedules. He understood who wanted attention, who wanted affection, and who wanted to feel important. And he knew that no prison, no matter how strong its walls were, could function without people. But even Richard Matt understood one thing. He couldn't do it alone. That partner turned out to be the man in the cell next to him, David Sweat. Where Matt was the planner, Sweat was the builder. He had spent most of his life in and out of prison and had been sentenced to life for killing a police officer. Over 12 years at Dannemora, he had gained access to prison workshops, learning carpentry, electrical repair, and mechanical work. Sweat knew the prison from the inside, not just as a prisoner, but as labor. Together, they formed something dangerous: vision and capability. Their first escape idea was simple and naive. Open their cell doors, reach the yard, climb the wall at the farthest point from the watchtowers. But the wall wasn't just tall. It was impossibly thick, reinforced with iron and embedded into mountain stone. Digging was impossible. Climbing was suicide. Within days, they abandoned the plan. Failure didn't discourage them, it focused them. If the walls couldn't be defeated from the outside, then the answer had to be inside the prison itself. What Richard Matt understood better than most inmates was that no prison is secured by concrete alone. It is secured by routine, complacency, and people who believe the system they work inside is stronger than the individuals passing through it every day. Guards rotate, supervisors change, procedures blur into habits, and somewhere inside that human lair, weaknesses appear. Matt didn't look for someone corrupt. He looked for someone lonely. That person was Joyce Mitchell. Mitchell worked in the prison's tailor shop, a civilian employee responsible for supervising inmates assigned to sewing and alterations. She was middle-aged, married, and by most accounts, deeply unhappy. Her job placed her in daily contact with inmates, but unlike guards, she wasn't trained to maintain emotional distance. She talked. She listened, she sympathized, and Richard Matt noticed immediately. Matt began slowly, compliments first, casual conversation. He flattered her intelligence, her kindness, her appearance. He treated her like someone special in a place designed to strip people of individuality. Over time, the attention intensified. He drew portraits for her, detailed, striking drawings that made her feel seen. He told her stories. He confided fears and dreams. He made her believe she mattered to someone dangerous, and that belief became intoxicating. David Sweat played his role differently. He stayed quiet, respectful, almost invisible. Where Matt pushed emotionally, Sweat observed technically. Through prison work details, Sweat had access to maintenance areas, pipes, wiring, and structural layouts. He learned which tunnels connected where, which pipes ran unused, which walls concealed cavities. He didn't rush, he cataloged. The turning point came when Mitchell crossed her first real line. She began bringing small items into the prison: screwdrivers, hacksaw blades, drill bits, hidden in frozen hamburger meat, bread loaves, and bags of frozen beef. None of these tools set off alarms because no one expected them to be there. The prison trusted its employees, and that trust quietly dissolved its own defenses. At night, after lights out, Matt and Sweat went to work. Inside their cells, they removed metal backing plates behind sinks and toilets. Behind those fixtures were walls no one ever inspected. Sweat began cutting through steel and concrete, using the smuggled tools, working inch by inch, night after night, muffling sound with towels and timing cuts with ambient noise. The process took months. There was no rush. Rushing made mistakes. Patience made exits. Mitchell didn't just provide tools. She provided information. She told Matt about shift changes, about when guards were distracted, about which nights were understaffed. She also agreed, at least initially, to help them after the escape. The plan was simple and terrifying. She would meet them outside the prison with a car and drive them away. That promise became the final psychological anchor keeping her involved. By the time fear caught up to her, she was already too deep. As the tunnel expanded, the men discovered something unexpected. The prison sat atop a complex network of old utility tunnels and steam pipes dating back decades. What had once been infrastructure for heating and maintenance had become a hidden artery beneath the facility. Sweat redirected the tunnel toward that network. Suddenly, escape didn't require breaching walls or scaling fences. It required slipping into a space the prison had forgotten existed. By early June 2015, the tunnel was complete. Matt and Sweat rehearsed every step mentally, from cell to tunnel, tunnel to steam pipe, pipe to maintenance corridor, corridor to manhole, manhole to freedom. They timed it repeatedly. Minutes mattered. Footsteps mattered. Everything mattered. The only thing they didn't control was Joyce Mitchell's courage. On the night of June 5, just hours before the planned escape, Mitchell panicked. She didn't show up where she was supposed to. She didn't bring the car. She stayed home, paralyzed by fear and guilt. Inside the prison, Matt and Sweat waited, listening. Minutes passed, then more. The original plan collapsed, but after months of preparation, they made a decision that would shock the entire country. They would leave anyway. Just after 11 p.m. on June 5, 2015, while most of Dannemora slept, Richard Matt and David Sweat made the decision that separated preparation from history. Joyce Mitchell wasn't coming. The car wasn't waiting. The safety net they had convinced themselves would be there had vanished. Inside their cells, the prison hummed with its usual night sounds: pipes ticking, distant footsteps, doors clanking shut for counts that no one expected to fail. The men exchanged a look through the narrow gap between their cells. Months of work came down to a single choice: stay and wait for consequences, or leave and accept whatever came next. They left. Sweat removed the last fixture behind the sink and slid into the opening first. The tunnel swallowed sound and light almost immediately. It was narrow, uneven, and damp, carved by hand over countless nights. Matt followed, pulling the makeshift cover back into place. From the outside, nothing had changed. 2 cells appeared occupied. 2 inmates appeared asleep. The prison continued breathing. They crawled through the tunnel on hands and knees, inching forward until the air changed and the walls opened into the steam pipe corridor beneath the prison. The pipes were massive, hot, and loud enough to cover any movement. Sweat had mapped this space in his head for months. He knew which turns led to dead ends and which led toward maintenance shafts. They moved carefully, mindful that a fall or wrong step could cripple them before they ever saw open air. At one point, Sweat realized he had dropped his flashlight. For a few seconds, they stood in total darkness beneath one of the most secure prisons in America, guided only by memory. He found it by touch. They kept going. The final barrier was a manhole leading out of the underground network. Sweat loosened the bolts. The cover lifted. Cool night air rushed in. Above them, the town of Dannemora lay quiet and unaware. They climbed out, emerging from a drainage area just beyond the prison walls, never climbing them, never touching razor wire, never triggering alarms. At 11:30 p.m., they were outside. Inside the prison, no one noticed. The first count that should have revealed their absence came and went. Officers checked cells visually, not physically. The beds looked occupied. The fixtures looked intact. Routine did the rest. It wasn't until nearly 5:30 a.m., during a more thorough count, that a guard realized something was wrong. The sinks were pulled away. The holes were exposed. The cells were empty. By then, Matt and Sweat were miles away, moving through forests and fields with no plan beyond distance. Without the car, they split from the original route almost immediately, choosing back roads in wooded areas to avoid towns. Helicopters rose into the sky as the alarm spread. Roadblocks appeared. Dogs were brought in. New York State launched one of the largest manhunts in its history. For weeks, the search dominated headlines. Hundreds of officers combed the Adirondacks. Residents locked their doors. Sightings poured in, most of them false. The men survived on stolen food, rainwater, and whatever shelter they could find. They argued, they separated and reunited. The partnership that had functioned so precisely inside the prison began to fracture under pressure. On June 26th, 3 weeks after the escape, the manhunt ended violently. Richard Matt was spotted near the Canadian border. When confronted by law enforcement, he refused to surrender. He was shot and killed at the scene. David Sweat continued alone for 2 more days, wounded during a confrontation, before finally being captured alive. The prison that had once called itself escape-proof faced an investigation that tore through every layer of its operation. Systems failed, oversight failed, trust failed, and one truth became impossible to ignore. The escape wasn't the result of a single mistake. It was the result of many small assumptions stacking on top of each other until the walls meant nothing. After Richard Matt was killed and David Sweat was captured, the story finally slowed enough for consequences to arrive, and they didn't land gently. Joyce Mitchell was arrested days later. When investigators questioned her, the full scope of her involvement came out in pieces: how the flattery worked, how the gifts and drawings made her feel visible, how the line between sympathy and complicity blurred slowly instead of snapping all at once. She admitted smuggling tools, passing information, and agreeing to be the getaway driver before fear stopped her at the last moment. In court, she wasn't treated as a victim of manipulation alone, nor as a mastermind. She was sentenced as something more uncomfortable: an ordinary person whose small decisions had enabled an extraordinary failure. She received up to 7 years in prison, a punishment meant as a warning to every civilian employee inside every prison in America. The fallout at Clinton Correctional Facility was immediate and brutal. Senior officials were removed from their positions, guards were disciplined, policies that had existed only on paper were rewritten and enforced aggressively. Inmate labor programs were restricted, tool inventories became obsessive, maintenance tunnels that had been ignored for decades were sealed, monitored, or destroyed entirely. Across the country, prison administrators quietly reviewed their own facilities, looking for forgotten spaces and trusted routines they had never questioned before. What stunned experts most wasn't the tunnel or the tools, it was how long the preparation went unnoticed. For months, 2 inmates had cut through walls, dismantled fixtures, and moved contraband without triggering alarms. Not because the prison lacked rules, but because it relied on visual checks, assumptions, and familiarity. Everyone believed someone else was watching closely.
David Sweat was returned to prison under conditions far harsher than before. His sentence extended and his movements tightly controlled. The freedom he had touched for just over 3 weeks came at the cost of permanent isolation. Richard Matt's story ended in the woods near the Canadian border, not with escape, but with the same refusal to surrender that had defined his life. In the end, the daring escape from the world's toughest prison wasn't a triumph. It was a mirror. It reflected what happens when institutions confuse strength with certainty and security with habit. 2 men didn't defeat a fortress by overpowering it. They walked through the spaces everyone forgot existed, aided by a system that trusted familiarity more than vigilance. For one night, the walls didn't matter, and that realization will haunt prison design long after the cells at Dannemora were sealed shut again.